The massive steel doors of the Galactic Defense Academy slid open with a soft hiss, revealing corridors that stretched endlessly into the heart of Kepler Station. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as both decoration and navigation system for the dozens of species that called this place home. Floating maintenance drones buzzed overhead, their sensors constantly monitoring the artificial atmosphere that kept cadets from 12 different worlds breathing the same. Air Cadet Zixara moved through the crowd with mechanical precision, her crystalline skin catching the ambient light and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Her species, the Valorians, had evolved on a world where logic and efficiency meant survival. Every step she took was calculated, every gesture optimized for maximum effectiveness with minimum energy expenditure. Her 3 eyes tracked multiple conversations simultaneously, while her internal processors analyzed the emotional states of passing students. Behind her, the massive form of Dekmal struggled to navigate the Academy's human-sized doorways. Standing, nearly 8 feet tall and weighing close to 400 pounds. The Krathari warrior was built for the high-gravity battlefields of his homeworld. His thick, armor-like skin bore the ritual scars of his people's coming-of-age ceremonies, and his 4 arms moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Despite his imposing appearance, Dekmal had the soul of a scholar, preferring ancient poetry to modern warfare tactics. Wisp floated beside them, their form shifting between solid and translucent as their hive mind processed information from thousands of connected individuals across the galaxy. The Nexari existed as both individual and collective, their consciousness shared among their entire species. When one Nexari learned something new, all of them knew it instantly. This made them invaluable as intelligence officers, but it also meant they struggled to understand concepts like personal sacrifice or individual heroism. The study group had been meeting for months, preparing for their final examinations in military history and tactical analysis. These tests would determine their placement in the Interstellar Peacekeeping Force, the galaxy's premier military organization. Each species brought unique advantages to the force: Valorian logic and strategic thinking, Krathari strength and honor codes, Nexari information processing, and communication networks. Together, they formed an unstoppable combination that had kept peace in the galaxy for over 2 centuries. As they walked, other cadets nodded respectfully to Zixara. She had the highest tactical scores in their class and was expected to graduate with honors. Her study group had become legendary among the student body, with cadets from other species often requesting permission to observe their sessions. Today's meeting would focus on primitive warfare tactics, subject that most advanced species considered. Beneath their notice, the secure viewing chamber was located in the Academy's restricted section, protected by multiple layers of security systems. Only senior cadets were allowed access, and even then only for approved educational purposes. The chamber itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, capable of projecting 3-dimensional holograms with perfect accuracy and full sensory simulation. Students could experience historical battles as if they were actually present. Feeling the heat of explosions and the weight of weapons in their hands, Dekmal squeezed through the chamber's entrance, his bulk making the reinforced doorframe creak ominously. "I still don't understand why we need to study ancient warfare," he grumbled, his deep voice resonating through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. "My people have been warriors for millennia, and we've never needed to throw rocks at our enemies." Zixara's processors hummed with amusement at his comment. Historical analysis provides valuable context for modern strategic thinking, she replied, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Valorians possessed. Understanding how primitive species resolved conflicts can help us predict the behavior of newly discovered civilizations. Wisp's form solidified slightly as they focused their attention on the conversation. "The collective agrees with Zixara's assessment," they said, their voice echoing strangely as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "Knowledge of primitive warfare tactics may prove useful when dealing with species that have not yet achieved proper civilization." The chamber's lighting system activated automatically as they entered, bathing the room in soft, warm light that was comfortable for all present species. The walls were lined with comfortable seating arrangements that could accommodate various alien physiologies, from the crystalline structures preferred by Valorians to the hubacked chairs that supported Crathery spinal columns. As the group settled into their usual positions, the chamber's door hissed open one final time. A figure in standard academy uniform entered quietly, his movements precise but somehow different from the calculated efficiency of the other species. This was Cadet Kim Minho, one of only a handful of human students at the academy. His people had joined the Galactic Coalition just 50 years ago, making them the newest members of the interstellar community. Minho's appearance was unremarkable by galactic standards. Unlike the exotic features of his alien classmates, he possessed the standard bipedal form common to many species, with brown hair and dark eyes that seemed to hold depths that his fellow cadets couldn't quite fathom. His academic performance was solid but not exceptional, his physical abilities average for his species, and his technical skills adequate but unremarkable. What set him apart was something more subtle, a quality that made even the most logical Valorian feel slightly unsettled in his presence. The human moved to his usual seat with quiet confidence, pulling out a data pad that looked primitive compared to the advanced neural interfaces used by other species. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice carrying none of the mechanical precision of Valorian speech or the resonant power of Crathery communication. "I was gathering some additional materials for today's session." Zixara's three eyes focused on the human with curious intensity. Minho had proven to be a valuable addition to their study group, offering perspectives that their logical minds sometimes missed. His species' recent addition to galactic civilization meant they brought fresh viewpoints to ancient problems, though their lack of advanced technology often made their contributions seem quaint rather than revolutionary. "What type of materials?" Wisp asked, their collective consciousness rippling with interest. The Nexari had been studying human culture since first contact, fascinated by a species that seemed to exist in a constant state of individual chaos, yet somehow achieved remarkable collective accomplishments. Minho's expression remained neutral. As he connected his datapad to the chamber's viewing system, historical footage from Earth's conflicts, he said simply, "I thought it might provide interesting examples of pre-space tactical thinking." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Pre-space warfare was considered a joke among advanced civilizations, a primitive remnant of species that hadn't yet learned to resolve conflicts through superior technology and logical negotiation. The idea that humans, with their crude kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, could teach anything to cadets who had mastered energy weapons and force field technology seemed almost insulting. Yet something in Minho's tone suggested this wouldn't be a typical lesson in primitive incompetence. As the viewing system activated and the chamber's lights dimmed, the alien cadets prepared themselves for what they assumed would be an amusing look at humanity's violent past, never suspecting that they were about to witness something that would challenge everything they believed about warfare, sacrifice, and the true nature of strength. The chamber's advanced holographic systems hummed to life, casting dancing shadows across the walls as the display screen flickered with static. Suddenly the room filled with the sound of crashing waves and distant thunder. The alien cadets instinctively leaned forward, their various sensory organs adjusting to process the grainy, black and white footage that materialized before them. The image showed a stormy coastline where massive waves pounded against concrete. Barriers and metal spikes, strange boxy vehicles churned through the turbulent water, their primitive designs looking clumsy compared to the sleek hovercraft used by modern galactic forces. From these crude boats, small figures began emerging. Into the chaos of battle, Zixara's crystalline features reflected the flickering light as her three eyes tracked multiple data streams simultaneously. Her internal processors immediately began analyzing what she was seeing, cataloging the primitive projectile weapons, and noting the complete absence of energy shields or force fields. "These kinetic weapons operate on chemical propulsion," she observed, her musical voice carrying a note of academic fascination. "Fascinating how they compensate for the lack of plasma technology." The footage showed human soldiers leaping from their landing craft into chest-deep water, struggling against the current while carrying heavy equipment. Above them, defensive positions erupted with muzzle flashes as bullets carved deadly patterns through the air. The primitive nature of the weapons was immediately apparent to the alien observers. Yet something about the scene felt unsettling in ways they couldn't quite identify. Minho's voice cut through the sound of battle, calm and measured despite the chaos playing out before them. Normandy, June 6, 1944. Allied forces attempting to establish a foothold in occupied Europe during what humans call the Second World War. He paused, letting the implications sink in. This single operation involved over 150,000 soldiers crossing the English Channel in primitive watercraft. The Mal's massive frame shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. His warrior culture had taught him to respect courage, but what he was seeing defied everything he understood about rational military doctrine. They're advancing directly. Into concentrated defensive fire, he rumbled, his deep voice carrying a note of disbelief. Where are their tactical shields? Their energy deflectors? The footage continued to roll, showing wave after wave of human soldiers struggling through the surf toward a beach that had become a killing field. The defensive positions above were perfectly positioned, creating overlapping fields of fire that should have made any advance impossible. Yet the humans kept coming, some falling only to be replaced by others who stepped over their bodies without hesitation. Wisps, translucent form flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in their species. Their hive-mind connection was picking up something that disturbed their collective consciousness on a fundamental level. The collective is confused, they announced, their voice echoing strangely. These individuals are choosing to advance despite certain death. This behavior contradicts basic survival programming. Zixara's logical processors began running complex calculations, trying to make sense of what she was observing.
Oh yeah, the casualty.
Projections must be obvious to their command structure, she said, her voice taking on the rapid cadence that indicated peak processing speed. Any competent military computer would recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. The mathematical probability of success is less than 12%. But the humans on the screen seemed oblivious to mathematical probabilities. They crawled forward through sand that had turned red with blood, using the bodies of fallen comrades as cover. Some carried wounded soldiers on their backs while still advancing. Others shared their ammunition with strangers, then continued, fighting with improvised weapons when their supplies ran out. The alien cadets watched in growing amazement as individual humans began displaying tactical innovation that their species had never encountered. When direct approaches failed, they found alternate routes. When their weapons jammed, they picked up enemy equipment and used it against its former owners. When communication systems failed, they developed hand signals and continued coordinating their attacks. Minho's datapad displayed tactical analyses that his alien classmates found increasingly difficult to process. Notice how they adapt in real time, he said quietly. No central command structure, no advanced AI coordination. Each squad operates independently while maintaining overall strategic cohesion. Vec Malls, forearms gestured nervously as he watched. A group of human soldiers use explosive charges to clear a path through defensive obstacles. This is not primitive warfare, he said slowly, his warrior instincts recognizing something profound. This is something else entirely. They're not just fighting, they're problem-solving under conditions that would break most species. The footage shifted to show medics running directly into enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as humans repeatedly risked their lives to save others, often dying in the process. This behavior was so foreign to their understanding of rational thought that their various biological and technological systems began experiencing processing errors. WISP's collective consciousness started broadcasting what could only be described as panic signals, individual sacrifice for group survival, they whispered, their form becoming almost completely transparent. The collective has no framework for understanding this phenomenon. How can individuals choose death when survival is the primary directive? Zixara's processors began experiencing what humans might call cognitive dissonance. The tactical mathematics are clear, she said, her voice taking on an almost desperate quality. Continued advance guarantees massive casualties. Retreat would preserve force strength for future operations. Yet they continue advancing. The holographic display showed human soldiers who had lost their weapons picking up rocks and throwing them at fortified positions. Others used their own bodies as bridges to help their comrades cross obstacles. Some wounded soldiers refused medical evacuation, choosing to continue fighting until they physically could no longer hold their weapons. Minho watched his classmates' reactions with quiet intensity. "You're seeing something that most galactic species consider impossible," he said. "Humans fighting not for territory or resources, but for ideas." These soldiers believed that stopping fascism was worth any personal cost. The concept of dying for abstract ideals was so foreign to the alien cadets that they began experiencing various forms of system shock. Valorian logic circuits weren't designed to process irrational behavior. Krathari honor codes included provisions for tactical retreat. Nixari collective consciousness automatically prioritized group survival over individual sacrifice. As the footage continued, the beach slowly transformed from a killing field into a beachhead. Human soldiers having absorbed casualties that would have destroyed any other known military force, began establishing defensive positions and preparing for the next phase of their operation. They had achieved the impossible through sheer determination and a willingness to pay any price for victory. The alien cadets sat in stunned silence, watching their fundamental assumptions about warfare and rational behavior crumble before their eyes. They had expected to see primitive combat techniques that would reinforce their sense of superiority. Instead, they had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about military science and the nature of sentient behavior. What they were seeing wasn't just footage of an ancient battle. It was their first glimpse into the true nature of humanity, and it terrified them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The holographic display flickered as Minho's datapad loaded new footage, and suddenly the chamber filled with the acrid smell of sulfur and decay. The advanced sensory systems of the viewing room made the alien cadets feel as though they were standing in the middle of a nightmare landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. Before them materialized a hellscape of mud and misery that defied comprehension. Trenches carved into the earth like infected wounds stretched across a barren wasteland where nothing grew except the twisted metal of barbed wire. The ground between opposing lines was churned into a soup of mud, blood, and things that the alien cadets preferred not to identify. Water pooled in the bottom of the trenches, creating a breeding ground for disease and despair. "World War I," Minho said quietly, his voice cutting through the sound of distant artillery that seemed to shake the very walls of the chamber. 1914 to 1918, 4 years of what humans call trench warfare. Zixara's crystalline form began to dim as her processors struggled to analyze what they were seeing. Human soldiers stood knee-deep in freezing water, their primitive uniforms rotting on their bodies. Some had been standing in the same positions for weeks, their feet literally rotting inside their boots. Yet they maintained their posts, weapons ready, eyes scanning the wasteland ahead for signs of enemy movement. The footage showed humans charging across open ground into streams of bullets that cut them down like wheat before a scythe. Machine guns, primitive but devastatingly effective, created killing fields that no rational being would attempt to cross. Yet wave after wave of human soldiers climbed out of their trenches and ran directly into certain death. Vorthok, the pragmatic Zeridian whose species had perfected the art of strategic withdrawal, watched in growing horror as humans continued their futile attacks. His elongated skull, evolved for maximum brain capacity, began to pulse with bioluminescent patterns that indicated severe psychological distress. "This is madness," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're sending thousands to die for a few." Meters of poisoned ground. The display shifted to show a new horror. Yellowish clouds drifting across the battlefield like fog. As the gas reached the human trenches, soldiers began convulsing, their lungs burning as chemical weapons dissolved their respiratory systems from the inside. The alien cadets watched in shock as humans continued fighting even while choking to death. Some using their last breaths to warn their comrades of incoming attacks, VX-Mall-S massive frame shuddered as he witnessed something that challenged his warrior culture's most basic principles. "They're dying from weapons that attack their own biology," he rumbled, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Any honorable species would ban such weapons immediately," dated Minho replied calmly. "After the war ended, but during the conflict, both sides used them extensively. Humans will use any weapon necessary to protect what they consider important." Wisp's hive mind connection began broadcasting waves of panic, as their collective consciousness tried to process individual humans choosing to die rather than retreat. "The collective cannot understand," they said, their translucent form flickering. "Rapidly, rational beings preserve themselves to fight another day. This behavior serves no logical purpose." The footage continued, showing horrors that seemed to escalate with each passing moment. Humans lived in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. They ate food contaminated with mud and worse, drank water that carried diseases, and slept standing up in trenches that flooded with every rainfall. Rats the size of cats fed on corpses that couldn't be retrieved from the killing fields. And the constant sound of artillery drove many soldiers to madness. Yet they endured. More than endured, they adapted. Humans developed new tactics, created improvised weapons, and maintained unit cohesion under conditions that should have broken any military force. They wrote letters to loved ones, knowing they would probably die before the letters arrived. And they sang songs to maintain morale while living in what could only be described as hell on Earth. The alien cadets watched medics crawling through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers, knowing that helping others would likely cost them their own lives. They saw humans sharing their last rations with enemies who had been trying to kill them moments before. They witnessed soldiers using their own bodies as shields to protect civilians who couldn't protect themselves. For years, Minho repeated, his voice carrying a weight that made the alien cadets shift uncomfortably. For years of this, with casualties measured in the millions, and when it ended, they called it the war to end all wars. The footage shifted again, showing urban warfare in a city that had been reduced to rubble. Humans fought building by building, room by room, against overwhelming odds. They used improvised explosives, fought with kitchen knives when their ammunition ran out, and continued resistance even when surrounded and outnumbered. Zixara's logical processors began experiencing what could only be described as system crashes. The mathematical probability of victory was zero, she said, her voice taking on an almost desperate quality. They had no hope of success, no possibility of survival, yet they continued fighting. The breaking point came when Minho displayed footage of ancient warfare that seemed to embody everything they had been witnessing. 300 human warriors stood at a narrow mountain pass, facing an army of over 1 million enemies. The mathematical impossibility of their situation was so obvious that even the most primitive computer would have recommended immediate surrender. Thermopylae, Minho explained as the alien cadets watched the small band of humans prepare for battle. 480 BC. 300 Spartan warriors chose to die rather than allow their enemies to pass unchallenged. The footage showed the warriors' final moments fighting with spears and shields against impossible odds. They knew they would die, had known it from the moment they chose to make their stand. Yet they fought with joy, celebrating the opportunity to sacrifice themselves for their people. Vorthak's carefully controlled composure finally shattered. It's the pragmatic Zeridian, whose species had survived for millennia through strategic thinking. And logical decision-making made a choking sound that echoed through the chamber. His elongated form convulsed as he vomited across the viewing chamber floor, his advanced intellect unable to process the concept of willing self-destruction. This story, Minho continued quietly, inspired human civilization for over 2,000 years. Children learned about these warriors, poets wrote about their sacrifice, and generals studied their tactics. Their willingness to die became the foundation of human military doctrine. The Kamal's warrior instincts, honed by millennia of honorable combat, began to recognize something that terrified him. Even his people, who prided themselves on courage and honor, had protocols for tactical retreat. They knew when to withdraw, when to preserve their forces for future battles. These humans seem to lack such basic survival mechanisms entirely. They're not just willing to die, he said slowly, his voice heavy with realization. They're eager to die if the cause is right. This isn't warfare, it's something else entirely. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of Vorthak's continued retching in the distant echo of ancient battle cries that seemed to hang in the air like a challenge to everything the alien. Cadets thought they knew about rational behavior. The viewing chamber's atmosphere grew thick with tension as Minho's fingers moved across his data pad with deliberate precision. The alien cadets had already witnessed horrors that challenged their understanding of rational behavior, but something in the human's expression suggested they hadn't seen anything yet. The holographic display flickered, preparing to show them footage that would shatter their worldview completely. "What I've shown you so far," Minho said, his voice carrying a strange mixture of pride and sorrow, "represents humanity's greatest failures. These were times when we couldn't find peaceful solutions, when diplomacy broke down, and we had to resort to violence to protect what we valued most." The implication hit the alien cadets like a physical blow. Everything they had witnessed, the impossible determination, the willingness to die for abstract concepts, the refusal to surrender even when facing certain death, these weren't examples of human strength, but human weakness. These were the times when humanity had failed to find better solutions. Sixara's crystalline form began to pulse with erratic patterns. Her processors struggled to reconcile this new information. "If these are your failures," she said slowly, her musical voice trembling, "then what do your successes look like?" Instead of answering directly, Minho activated the next sequence of footage. The screen filled with images that seemed to come from a nightmare scenario that even the most advanced galactic civilizations couldn't have imagined. A walled section of a city, surrounded by armed forces with superior weapons and unlimited ammunition. Inside the walls, humans, men, women, children, elderly, all taking up whatever weapons they could find. Warsaw Ghetto, 1943, Minho narrated. As the footage showed humans crafting explosives from household chemicals and turning kitchen knives into spears, the inhabitants knew they couldn't win. They had no hope of survival, no possibility of rescue. Yet they chose to fight rather than accept their fate. The alien cadets watched in growing horror as children no older than Galactic Academy cadets ran through streets carrying ammunition to fighters who were already dying. They saw elderly humans, some barely able to walk, positioning themselves as snipers in ruined buildings. They witnessed families saying goodbye to each other, knowing they would never meet again, then walking calmly into battles they couldn't possibly survive. This massive frame began to tremble as he processed what he was seeing. His warrior culture had taught him about honor and courage, but this transcended anything his people had ever conceived. "They're not just willing to die," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're transforming death into a weapon against their enemies." The footage shifted to show aerial combat, primitive aircraft locked in deadly duels high above burning cities. The alien cadets watched human pilots continue fighting, even when their aircraft were damaged beyond repair. Awesome, deliberately flying. They're burning machines into enemy positions rather than ejecting to safety. These weren't acts of desperation, they were calculated decisions made by rational beings, who had weighed their options and chosen the path that would inflict maximum damage on their enemies. Wisps, hive mind. The connection began broadcasting something that could only be described as existential terror. Their collective consciousness evolved to process information from billions of connected individuals. Suddenly understood the true implications of what they were witnessing. The collective is experiencing system failure, they announced, their translucent form flickering rapidly. Individual humans are choosing death not just for themselves, but for the psychological impact on their enemies. The revelation crashed through the alien cadets' minds like a tsunami of understanding. Humans weren't just fighting wars. They were waging psychological warfare against opponents who shared their own biology, their own psychology, their own capacity for fear and despair. They had learned to weaponize their own willingness to die, turning their apparent weakness into their greatest strength. Minho's data. The pad displayed tactical analyses that sent chills through the alien observers. You have to understand, he said quietly, humans have been fighting other humans for thousands of years. We've been locked in an evolutionary arms race with the most dangerous predator in our galaxy ourselves. Zixara's logical processors began experiencing cascading failures as she tried to process this concept. You've been at war with your own species, she said, her voice taking on a mechanical quality that indicated severe system stress. Greatest enemy has always been other humans. Yes, Minho confirmed, his expression growing darker. We've spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who think exactly like us, who share our strengths and weaknesses, who understand our psychology because they are us. Every weapon we've developed, every tactic we've mastered, every strategy we've perfected was all designed to kill other humans. The alien cadets sat in stunned silence as the full implications of this revelation sank in. They had been studying. Alongside beings who had been forged in the fires of internecine warfare, would learn to fight against enemies who possessed the same terrible determination they had witnessed in the footage. Humans weren't just warriors, they were the ultimate warriors, trained by nature itself to fight the most dangerous opponents imaginable. Warthak, who had recovered somewhat from his earlier breakdown, raised his elongated head to stare at Minho with a mixture of fear and fascination. Your species achieved spaceflight while still actively fighting each other, he said slowly. You developed interstellar travel while your planet was still divided into competing nations. We had nuclear weapons before we had lasting peace, Minho replied. We reached the moon while fighting wars on 3 continents. We built space stations while pointing weapons of mass destruction at each other. Humans have always been able to cooperate and compete simultaneously. The viewing chambers, environmental systems, began working overtime as the alien cadets' various physiologies responded to extreme stress. The Kamal's honor-based warrior culture simply had no framework for understanding beings who could fight. Members of their own species with the same dedication they had shown against external threats. WISP's collective consciousness was broadcasting panic signals as it tried to process individual humans who could turn against their own kind while still maintaining species-wide cooperation. This is why human ships volunteer for the most dangerous missions, Zixara said, her voice gaining strength as her processors finally began to make sense of the data. This is why human units have the highest casualty rates, but also the highest success rates in the peacekeeping force. Minho nodded grimly. We're not afraid of dying because we've been dying for each other for a millennia. We're not afraid of fighting because we've been fighting ourselves forever. We're not afraid of sacrifice because we've learned that sometimes sacrifice is the only way to protect what matters most. The alien cadets began to understand that they weren't just looking at footage of primitive warfare. They were witnessing the birth of the galaxy's most dangerous species, forged in the crucible of endless internal conflict. Humans had survived and thrived, not despite their tendency toward violence, but because of it. They had learned to channel their destructive impulses into protective instincts, to turn their capacity for hate into an even greater capacity for love. We joined the Galactic Coalition not to bring warfare to the stars, Minho continued, but to ensure that no other species ever has to experience what we've experienced. We've already paid the price for wisdom. We know the true cost of violence. Because we've been paying it for thousands of years. The chamber fell silent as the alien cadets realized they had been completely wrong about humanity's place in the galaxy. These weren't primitive newcomers who had stumbled into space travel through luck and persistence. These were the ultimate survivors, a species that had conquered the most dangerous enemy in the universe themselves, and emerged stronger for the experience. They were the galaxy's immune system, the beings willing to pay any price to protect. Others from the darkness they had already conquered within themselves. The viewing chambers, holographic display faded to black, leaving only the soft blue glow of the Academy's emergency lighting systems. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic hum of life. Support systems that kept the diverse group of alien cadets breathing the same carefully regulated atmosphere. Each being sat motionless, their various sensory organs, still processing the impossible images they had witnessed. Minutes passed before anyone dared to speak. The weight of revelation hung heavy in the recycled air, pressing down on alien minds that had been fundamentally altered by what they had seen. These weren't the same cadets who had entered the chamber expecting to laugh at primitive human warfare tactics. They were changed beings, forced to confront truths about the universe that their comfortable assumptions had never prepared them for. Vorthak was the first to break the silence, his elongated Zeridian frame unfolding from his chair with mechanical precision. His species had evolved past the need for emotional responses, relying instead on pure logical analysis to navigate complex situations. Yet even his advanced intellect was struggling to process the implications of human behavior. "I need to reconsider my career path," he announced, his voice carrying the flat tone that indicated maximum cognitive stress. "My analysis protocols are clear. I cannot serve alongside beings who view death as an acceptable outcome rather than something to be avoided at all costs." His words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing the other cadets to confront their own doubts and fears. Zeridian's pragmatic nature had always been his strength, allowing him to find logical solutions to complex problems. But logic itself seemed inadequate when dealing with a species that operated outside the parameters of rational thought. Zixara's crystalline form flickered with unstable patterns, as her processors ran continuous calculations, trying to find a framework that could accommodate humans as allies, rather than threats. Her Valorian mind was designed for perfect logical analysis, but the data she had just witnessed defied every algorithm she possessed. "The mathematical models are inconsistent," she said, her musical voice carrying an edge of desperation. "Humans are too unpredictable, too willing to sacrifice everything for intangible concepts like honor and freedom. How can we create tactical plans with allies who might choose death over strategic retreat?" Her three eyes focused on Minho with something approaching accusation. The human had shattered her carefully ordered worldview, forcing her to confront the possibility that logic itself might be insufficient for understanding the complexities of galactic civilization. The Kamala's massive Krathari frame shifted uncomfortably, his four arms moving in agitated patterns that indicated deep emotional turmoil. His people had built their entire culture around concepts of honor and courage, priding themselves on their warrior traditions that stretched back thousands of years. Yet everything he had witnessed suggested that human concepts of honor transcended anything his species had ever conceived. "My people have always prided themselves on warrior culture," he admitted slowly, his deep voice rumbling with uncertainty. "We face death bravely when necessary, and we honor those who fall in battle. But we also know when to surrender, when to preserve our forces for future conflicts. Humans, don't seem to have that limitation." His words carried the weight of a warrior culture suddenly discovering that their understanding of courage was incomplete. The Krathari had spent millennia perfecting the art of honorable combat, but they had never encountered beings who could transform death itself into a weapon against their enemies. Wisp's collective consciousness flickered with distress signals that rippled through their translucent form like waves on a disturbed pond. Their hive mind connection, which normally provided comfort and certainty through shared knowledge, was broadcasting confusion and fear from billions of connected individuals across the galaxy. "How do we trust beings who lack basic survival instincts?" they asked, their voice echoing with the harmonics of their collective uncertainty. "The hive mind cannot compute individuals who choose death over continued existence. This behavior contradicts fundamental biological programming." The question hung in the air like an accusation, forcing each cadet to confront their own assumptions about the nature of sentient behavior. They had been trained to work with diverse species, to accommodate different cultural perspectives and biological requirements. But humans seemed to operate outside the basic parameters that governed all other known forms of life. Minho had remained silent throughout his classmates' crisis, watching their reactions with the patience of someone who had anticipated this moment. His human features showed no surprise at their horror, no offense at their fear. He understood that he had just shown them something that challenged the very foundations of their understanding about life, death, and the nature of rationale behavior. Finally, he stood up, his his movements carrying the quiet confidence that had always set him apart from his alien classmates. When he spoke, his voice held a weight of authority that seemed to come from depths that the others couldn't fully comprehend. "You're afraid because you think we're monsters?" he said quietly, his words cutting through their panic with surgical precision. "But consider this: we fight so ferociously precisely because we understand what we're protecting. Every human who dies in battle does so knowing the cost, choosing to pay it so others don't have to." He moved to the chamber's massive windows where the stars of the galaxy twinkled in the eternal darkness of space. His gesture encompassed the infinite expanse beyond, where billions of species lived and died under the protection of the Galactic Coalition. "We joined the Galactic Coalition not to bring warfare to the stars," he continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "We came to ensure that the horrors we've inflicted on ourselves never happen again on a galactic scale. We've already paid the price for wisdom. We know the true cost of violence because we've been paying it for thousands of years." Zixara's processors began to stabilize as a new calculation emerged from the chaos of conflicting data. Her logical mind, designed to find patterns and solutions, suddenly identified a framework that could accommodate human behavior within rational parameters. "You're saying humans are dangerous because you choose to be?" she said slowly, her voice regaining its musical quality as understanding dawned, and equally capable of choosing not to be. "Exactly," Minho replied, turning back to face his classmates. "We've conquered the darkness within ourselves. We've learned to channel our capacity for violence into protective instincts. Now we're here to help others avoid falling into the same darkness that once consumed us." The alien cadets sat in contemplative silence, each processing this revelation according to their own biological and cultural programming. Some would leave the academy unable to serve alongside beings whose behavior defied their understanding of rational thought. Others would stay, recognizing that humanity's capacity for violence was matched only by their commitment to protecting the innocent. Vorthak was the first to make his decision, his pragmatic nature ultimately recognizing the logical implications of what he had learned. "If humans have truly conquered their own destructive impulses," he said slowly, "then serving alongside them might provide the galaxy with its greatest protection against future threats." One by one, the other cadets began to voice their own choices. Some would transfer to civilian sectors, finding roles in the Galactic Coalition that didn't require them to work directly with human military units. Others would remain, understanding that they were about to serve alongside the most dangerous species in the galaxy and perhaps the most necessary as they filed out of the viewing chamber. Each carried the knowledge that their understanding of the universe had been fundamentally altered. They were no longer naive cadets preparing for routine peacekeeping duties. They were beings who had glimpsed the true nature of humanity and found themselves forever changed by the experience. The next morning would bring graduation ceremonies, where those who remained would take their oaths to serve in the interstellar peacekeeping force. They would go forth into the galaxy knowing that they served alongside guardians who had already paid the ultimate price for wisdom, beings who had conquered the darkness within themselves and dedicated their lives to protecting others from experiencing the same horrors. The chamber's lights dimmed automatically as the last cadet departed, leaving only the eternal stars visible. Through the massive windows, somewhere among those distant suns, the civilizations of the galaxy continued their daily lives. Protected by a peace that few of them truly understood, was maintained by the very species they had once feared. The N